Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. This is the Government Blockchain Association's Healthcare and Life Sciences monthly public webinar. I'm the chair of the working group at the GBA. My name is Heather Flannery. I'm thrilled to be here today with an esteemed guest and speaker, Dr. Chris Smithmeyer. Today, we are going to be unpacking all of the implications of the passage of the Genius Act in US jurisdiction and the potentials and possibilities of the broad and extensive use of stablecoins in healthcare payments in the United States. So that's our topic for today. I'm absolutely delighted to ask you, Dr. Smithmeyer, to introduce yourself.
Okay. Hi, my name is Dr. Chris Smithmeyer. I am the CEO of Black Wallet Limited. We are a stablecoin 2.0 ecosystem management company, and we are also doing some high-end tokenization levels, and we also facilitate large-scale transactions. So we got started in this space about 4 years ago, and one of the first things we noticed was that there are problems with the way stablecoins work. While they're the most amazingly branded thing in the world, because they're based on the US dollar, they're not actually stable. The dollar goes down in value every year because of um, interest, or not interest, I'm sorry, inflation. And that causes them to not really be real true stable. So we started looking at how we can do this. We wanted to bring it to the lowest common denominator, which was goods and services, and that's how we built our stable coin. And if you want to check that out in a little bit more detail, check out www.kiroscoin, Kiros coin.com, and that'll give you a little bit of details. But I think we're here to talk about healthcare and stablecoin, so I don't want to just kind of show my product. I'd rather talk about the issues.
Absolutely. Thank you. And do you mind if I call you Chris, Dr. Smithmeyer?
Yes, yes, Chris is much better. Dr. Smithmeyer's my baby brother.
Ah, I see.
Yeah,
Okay.
he got his
Well,
PhD before me, or he got his doctorate before me. He doesn't have a PhD. He has a pharmaceutical doctorate.
if you don't mind, just as a continuation of your introduction, do you mind just providing a little bit more about your background
Oh,
in law, in conflict resolution, et cetera, and what brings you into the crypto space just through that background? Maybe like a 60-second version of that. I think it's really germane to the discussion.
okay, excellent. Yeah, I hold nine degrees. I have a law degree, two LLMs, an MBA, PhD, a whole bunch of degrees. I collect letters after my name, and I worked as the Vice President of International Affairs for Brave Online Conflict Management up until that little thing in 2021 called COVID, where and this is why I'm so interested in the healthcare field, because we had a very successful company at that time. We were actually forced to shut down because of COVID. And I know everybody out there is saying, hey, everybody's company was forced to shut down. We never met our clients. We were completely 100% digital. And when we called into Michigan to the Department of Labor, who was who we all got all the nasty letters from, they said, well, we don't know how this is transmitted. And it's like, well, we know it's not transmitted through computers. I mean, we're 90% sure on that. So I got involved with cryptocurrency, and I got involved with several organizations. The chief of those was the Government Blockchain Association. It was a great match. Gerard and the team are absolutely amazing. And we started working on stuff. And I actually had the privilege for the Dynamic Coalition on Blockchain Assurances and Standards of writing the model law for the United Nations IGF, which talks about different management methodologies and how we can deal with cryptocurrency in a way that protects everybody. And I've been talking to congressmen around the country, specifically state congressmen mostly, um, as it comes to like the Genius Act, which we're talking about today. There are good things and there are bad things, and we really need the community to step up and say, we need to allow for innovation, but we also need the regulation. And this Genius Act is a good draft, but it needs to be brought up to date because it looks really good for 2015. It's not really modern. So I basically go around to congressmen and complain about the way they're writing the laws and help them fix that.
Well, that's fantastic, and I think in due course in the conversation, digging into the implications of that model law being replicated across low and middle income countries and the implications for global health and payments outside the United States and globally. I think that's a natural extension of this initially US focused conversation. Well, thank you. And just for the record, your doctorate, you mentioned your doctorate.
In conflict analysis and resolution, and then I have one in law.
Yeah.
So two topics.
Yep. Well, thank you. So let's start by unpacking the Genius Act. What I would love for you to do is to summarize the high points of the Genius Act, including maybe some commentary on the process that has played out to its passage. And as you summarize that, I have follow-on questions for you about the evolution of stablecoin adoption in a segment that is over 18% of the US GDP. So let's start by having you walk us through the Genius Act, summarize it. I'll follow up with additional questions for you. Over.
Okay, so there are three big things with the Genius Act that we really want to be looking at. The first is the purpose and objectives. Like, what were they doing with this act? And this is one of the most challenging parts to discuss, especially whenever I'm a critic of the act right now, is because they actually went after their right goals. Like their main goals were, first off, is regulatory clarity. I think most people that are listening to your podcast probably realize that everybody was hoping for regulatory clarity from the Ripple versus the SEC case, which just never, it kind of fizzled out because after the SEC won the case and then Ripple came out and said, "Hey, we won the case," and then they went to the appellate court, then they reached a settlement, which nobody really knows what the whole settlement was. So it just left it in that creepy gray area, and it really caused a question also of whether the federal government should be allowed to sue individuals, because really we're supposed to have that beyond a reasonable doubt level when the government's accusing of us of stuff and they're just using civil cases to get around that. So the purpose was to give this regulatory clarity to make sure on what the stablecoin market was and where the gray areas ended. Next is consumer protection. And after the Libra case, after the Trump tokens, after the Wolf tokens, and those kind of big issues that have come up in the last couple years, we need consumer protections for users in the field. This is not just a field anymore where it's just degens. There are people that are getting into this, hearing about it on the news, not understanding it, and they're buying something they don't understand. And we need consumer protections. It's not something where it's buyer beware is good enough. We have to actually step up and do that. And in order to have that, we need to have financial stability, which is one of the other goals of the Genius Act, where they need to show that there's a financially stable model for the coins. And that the goal that we're promoting is, of course, US dollar dominance. And they're coming right out and saying that. It's a little bit jingoistic for my taste because, I mean, we're a free market country, but we want our dollar to be what controls the free market. And until the market is brought back to being an American coin rather than a Federal Reserve coin, there really is a question on whether it's the US dollar represents the US people or whether it represents corporate interests. And then, of course, they turn right around and say we want to foster innovation in the market whenever they tell people like any innovation is going to be punished criminally and civilly. So that's their first thing we need to look at. And did you want to go into that in a little more depth before we step into the next two elements?
Actually, I'd love to keep it at high altitude for a moment and
Okay.
just get some big pictures before we dig into the weeds.
Okay.
Disambiguate for us MiCA in EU and Genius Act in the US at a high level.
MiCA is a general cryptocurrency and digital assets regulation. It's not a scalpel, it is a wide net. Whereas the Genius Act is specifically targeting stablecoins in the United States. So it is very, very focused and has a specific purpose. So MiCA basically went out and said, hey, how can we regulate cryptocurrency across the European Union? they came up with this very, very good set of laws, but it's very, very expensive. The United States came in and said, how can we regulate stable coins? And then they went and talked to two stablecoin providers and said, what would you like to have to make sure that you guys are dominant in this field? And it's constitutionally questionable because of how they came to the rules on it, but it is so surgical to protect a specific market segment that is owned by two companies that are not even American companies right now.
Okay, all right. Thank you for that. And big picture on Genius Act, there are specific reserve requirements. And could you, first of all, just for the audience, for anyone unfamiliar with stablecoins and how they are generally reserved across a range of strategies, if you could just summarize that at a big picture and then say, this is what the Genius Act selected for its reserve strategy, and the rationale for that and any downsides you see for that.
Okay. So what a original level one stablecoin is, and I should have brought you a picture of my book, the stablecoin book that actually goes through all the different kinds of stablecoins. A regular stablecoin is a one-for-one dollar value token so that you can function in the digital economy without using dollars. The first one was Tether. I think everybody here is probably familiar with Tether. And Brock Pierce and Reeve Collins got together and they tokenized the US dollar. So real world asset tokenized. So for every dollar they issued, they have a dollar in reserve. And then if you want to trade your dollar in, you could get your dollar back by giving them their dollar. So it was basically, remember back in the 80s, whenever you went to Disney World and they gave you like those Disney dollars that you traded for dollars? And you went and bought stuff with it in their environment, but then once you left the environment, it did you absolutely no good. Stablecoin 1.0s were kind of like that because you went and you bought the stablecoin, but it only worked in the digital exchanges where they accepted that token. Now, over the years, Circle and Tether have vastly expanded that. So this is what they created as a stablecoin, which is the on-ramp and off-ramp of the cryptoverse. It's basically how you get from physical dollars to digital money. Now, here is where the misunderstanding comes with the US government because they put a whole bunch of reserve requirements on stable coins that they do not hold to US dollar accounts because we have what's called fractional reserve banking, and currently the fraction is zero because banks are no longer required to hold money. So they're having a 100% requirement on cryptocurrencies that are stables in the Genius Act. Of course, it has not passed anything but the Senate yet because the House has its own stablecoin act, which has its own unique issues. But they're requiring 100% reserve for the stablecoin, which means that the business cannot really make money off of it unless they're using bonds or stocks or something like that to keep the business going. Now, where they really put a spike in the wheel of anybody outside Circle or Tether is they said you're only allowed to use US dollars or short-term treasury notes, which short-term treasury notes, as everybody knows, have basically no return interest rate. So you're creating a system where you're making the companies that are issuing the stable coin fundamentally unstable because they can't make money to pay their employees without basically using dangerous books. So the more modern stable coins, like anything from stablecoin like 1.4 and on, were designed to use a true stability model, not a negative stability model, which I know I'm starting to get a little bit in the weeds here. But the writers of the law didn't take that into effect, and they didn't take that how this works to make sure that a business can actually successfully run on the model they set out. So unless you're already a multi-billion dollar company, this bill will likely kill all innovation in the field.
Well, you certainly have no shortage of very strong opinions.
Yeah.
Let's be fair to the proponents of the bill and present their arguments against that.
Okay.
Let's discuss a little bit the issue of an uneven playing field from the perspective of TradFi, or traditional finance, seeking to enter the stablecoin market, and the lobbying and the the advocacy that came from that side of finance to provide a regulatory framework that didn't disproportionately advantage crypto companies by comparison to TradFi companies. What say you on that argument?
Um, it's not a, I know it's not your argument, so I don't want to represent Heather as representing that position because
We
it's a
need to
very,
have, I'm just saying we need to have a balanced
yeah.
discussion. So,
Yeah,
uh,
well, that's what the TradFi company said when they went to the congressman they own, and they said we have to have a balanced discussion, but if you don't kill off a lot of these stable coins, we're not going to sponsor you for your next election. Let's be very clear on that's what happened. And
well,
it wasn't saying they need to have a stable thing against the TradFi. It was to maintain the TradFi dominance in this space. And it was led by about five banks. There are a lot of banks, and this is not me attacking TradFi because I actually work actively with TradFi. I do believe there are very, very good banks, and some of them are very large banks that are good. Boney Mellon, for example, or BNY Mellon is working very hard to get stablecoins and crypto assets regulated, right, or regulated and recognized as an asset class without killing what they see as competition. But there are several banks out there that are Wall Street banks that are very much against anything that is outside the status quo, and that's where a lot of the voice came for this. Now, there are good banks that have contributed. The Federal Reserve, and this I feel dirty for even saying this, but the Federal Reserve has actually been very pro cryptocurrency in this discussion because they want the innovation. If the United States is going to lead, they want to maintain that, and they've been pushing it very hard to protect that innovation here in the United States. Whereas some banks are, we don't understand it, therefore it is bad. And I've had to deal with some of those banks. I've even given lectures to some of their banks' senior membership about how you can function in this space without choking it off. Because between your wealth and your cryptocurrency, there are four steps. There is the US dollar, for most of us, I mean, who deal with the US dollar. There is the banking institution which holds your US dollars, which is the Federal Reserve and Federal Reserve licensed bank. There is the on-ramp and the off-ramp, which is Tether or Circle. A rise out of the UK, or not the UK, out of the Netherlands is also very good in that area. Then there is your cryptocurrency wallet, which protects your cryptocurrency. That's where you store it. And then there's your actual cryptocurrency. The problem that we're facing right now is the banks don't understand that they are a fundamental part of that chain. If they aren't in that chain, the wealth management through cryptocurrency doesn't exist. And they're so afraid that somebody's going to try to cut them out, but it is basically the face cutting off the nose to spite itself. It doesn't Taking them out doesn't work. And it's not that they're bad people. I mean, they're probably bad people and good people like in everything else, but it comes down to educating them and helping them understand that what their role is and how they make money in that role. And that crypto isn't this big boogeyman that's going. I mean, I know the degens are out there. There's probably they're wringing their hands and screaming, and I know a couple of them that are probably screaming at the screen right now. But their belief that we're going to completely eliminate banks is just their version of digital anarchy. We're not in this to eliminate banks. They have a fundamental role in what we do. It's just helping them understand what their role is, and that us crypto folks aren't these big scary people that are looking to shut them down. We're just looking to work with them and, like you said, work on a fair playing field. But um, the fair playing field has to be flat. It can't be leaning with a lot of advantage towards them. So I'm very, as you can tell, very, like you said, very opinionated on this field.
indeed, indeed. So on Genius Act, there are specific permitted issuers, and this is one of the more controversial points in the law. They talk about something called a regulated non-bank. Could you speak to what they mean by a regulated non-bank and how that does or doesn't apply to, let's say, a crypto-oriented issuer domiciled in the United States jurisdiction.
It One of the reasons it's so complicated is because they really don't explain it completely. If you can get the comptroller of currencies to like say that you're a non-bank issuer, like if I called down and talked to Christine down there at the Treasury Department, the comptroller of currencies, and I said, "Hey, this is what Kuros does. Can we be a non-bank issuer?" And she says yes, you're an issuer, as opposed to like something that has a very clear list, because it's still a gray area that we have to clean up and say what the rules are. And whenever you have a non whenever you have a gray area in federal law, you have the always the project of or problem of corruption. And what's to stop somebody from just letting a company that they've known for years become uh, a non-bank issuer? So this is where it gets really iffy because it's not super clear. Now there are some guidelines, but they're not anywhere near detailed enough. And we're hoping that it means companies like mine that are grandfathered in or should be grandfathered in. There is no grandfather clause on the Genius Act, by the way, which makes it an ex post facto law. But it it's just like it's very difficult to define because they don't give us a definition. And it's basically all we know is that the issuer is not a bank, but we don't know what qualified means. Like,
Yeah,
tell us what qualified is.
if you're not a subsidiary of an insured depository
Yeah,
organization, you're this thing called a regulated non-bank.
yeah,
That I do think that that's I think you're spot on that that's a major area of ambiguity that would need to be resolved as immediately as possible. Um, Taking into consideration a genuine sense of urgency to establish regulatory clarity as immediately as possible. So I do recognize the tension between speed and time to action, and perfection potentially being the enemy of the good. If we spent 6 more months or another year debating at least a first regulatory framework for stablecoins in this market. So I'm just highlighting that where copying and pasting banking laws is fast.
yeah, yeah.
If nothing else, and speed is a priority that does matter. So I'm just balancing things a little bit,
Yeah.
but so taking it now into healthcare. One characteristic of the U.S. health system is that there's a tremendous amount of variance state by state in detailed regulations that span everything from data use and privacy law to different reporting requirements, and then there is always the complex and sweeping set of health specific legislation, regulation, and policy coming out of the federal government. Thinking about healthcare, a characteristic for people in healthcare that have been in healthcare delivery, everyone understands that even if you're part of a giant conglomerate, healthcare is very local. It's very on the ground. It's very anchored in communities. It might be administratively managed in a giant corporation, but the practice of medicine, the delivery of healthcare services is super local and very entwined with state and local government, as well as federal government. A huge amount of the expenditure in the U.S. health economy is block granted from federal authorities to state authorities, where it is then administered under state law and policy and so on. One high value potential for the use of stablecoins is to inject that new payments apparatus as a part of a broader program to mitigate waste, fraud, and abuse. In that, I'd love if you could double click for a moment on the federal state preemption matters in the proposed Genius Act, and how that would or wouldn't impact the ability to achieve a national rapid, large-scale remediation of waste, fraud, and abuse. And maybe also just a generic comment from you about why using stable coins and transactions that have state persisted on chain in some architecture is very different than the way we do payments in fiat today, and just generally how that can be a part of a waste, fraud, and abuse mitigation strategy.
Okay. I'd like to start off with saying my company doesn't do that, so I'm not, because I'm going to be pushing stables very hard here on this. We don't do that. That's not what we do here. In my company, we're an institution to institution and or an institution to government stablecoin, so we don't do that. But if we want to reduce by probably half the graft and corruption that we see in the healthcare field right now, this is the way to go, because not only do stable coins act as a dollar equivalent in making payments, but they are completely traceable to who's being paid, especially if they're being paid to official wallets. So if you are Dr. Jekyll out there and you are issuing opiates and people are paying for that through their insurance company, which is remediating it with a stable coin, then it will be searchable to look for government regulators to see Dr. Jekyll issued 500,000 prescriptions for opioids in 2025, and he only has 200 customers that these wallets are coming from. There's a problem there. He's issuing 20 prescriptions to every single patient he has. Whereas like if you have Dr. Hyde on the other side of this, where he's issuing the proper amount, and the best part is, and this is something that I want to get out there to the crowd, is we can keep the wallets on the patient's side anonymized and let the data be searched by doctor to see what they're doing, what they're issuing, what they're using. If somebody's using 2.8 million gauze pads a year and they're a single practitioner, you know that they're sending false claims into Medicare and Medicaid. And this allows us to search that. So it's such an important thing to do. The next thing is it becomes more convenient, because anybody that's ever had to fight a big insurance company knows one of the biggest problems is they'll say, well, we paid for that. No, no, you didn't. Well, you can't, you have to now prove that we don't have to pay for it. Newsflash, no, it's their job to prove something to you, not the other way around. You don't have to prove things to an insurance company. You're their client, not the other way around. But whenever you start using digital assets, you can actually search the wallet addresses for the time frame that they say it is, because I'm sure everybody's here that's dealt with an insurance company knows, oh, we lost that, or that's a privileged file because we can't share with you what we paid a doctor because other people were paid in that batch.
Mhm.
The stable coins allow it to be done on an individual basis rather than on a batch basis. And that means that your data can belong to you. And I think that's more getting into what Heather's an expert in there, because they're very big on protecting people's data and their privacy. And whenever we do this, insurance companies that are filing false claims or paying no one, or actually they're not paying no one, they're paying themselves and just pretending like they lost the money. It allows us to isolate that. It allows us to focus on what wallet paid it. And the best part is every wallet has a set of keys, and someone has to sign for that with their private key. And we can go in and see who signed for that and who stole the money from the American people. And because I've seen estimates as high as 53% of what our national budget is from Health and Human Services and bringing it into Medicare, Medicaid, insurance policy fraud, the vets, that up to 53% of that is graft and corruption. And if we could cut that out, that is more than the amount of the interest on our national debt every year. That would
Absolutely.
be, it would be enough to, we could start getting cash flow positive again here in the United States. And it's so important. And the Stablecoin Act, unfortunately, would kill that, because the insurance companies and the hospitals couldn't use their own internal dedicated stable that is set up properly to do that. Because if you're using it for internal transactions, and some stables are very good for internal transactions, if you have to keep a 100% reserve and you are transacting $1.4 billion internally a year, this means these hospitals that are already scraping for money would have to maintain that balance on their balance sheet to say, hey, we want to use this to balance out our system. So it was written with good intentions by people that didn't have a good understanding of the utility of actual stablecoins.
So I'd like to expand on that a little bit in terms of the applicability to the health economy. The main parties issuing payments, this is not exclusively, but the bulk of payments are coming from public and private insurers, health insurers.
Mhm.
And that includes employer-sponsored plans where the funding is coming from employers, and there's a third-party insurance company that is administering an employer-specific plan. So between Medicare, Medicaid, supplement plans, the private insurance market, and the employer-sponsored insurance, these all have different dimensions, but those are the large blocks in healthcare payments. In the event that we are able to adopt a stablecoin strategy for healthcare payments, for that to realize its value proposition, it has to be paired with other blockchain related technologies that are critical to the realization of the value prop. Just one example of that is an institutional identity framework that can be paired to wallet addresses that is absolutely necessary for the mitigation of waste, fraud, and abuse. On the individual citizen level, there is also a secondary and tertiary identity apparatus that would eliminate another layer of waste, fraud, and abuse through human and self-sovereign AI curated transactions where every individual person is the air traffic controller of every workflow that flows through them. So there are different places to inject monitoring and evaluation and auditability on demand. But most fundamentally, let's imagine you were to, and forgive me all for using blockchain as a verb, but if we were to blockchain the US health system to establish things like provenance for model training, verifiable integrity of health information, the ability to transact on a multi-party basis among many stakeholder groups without having to centralize data, by breaking down all of the health data silo problems, creating precision medicine constructs. All of that is doable without a stablecoin. But if you don't have a stablecoin added into that mix, you cannot do anything about the speed and efficiency of commerce itself, and you can't financially audit as well as operationally audit in parallel. And being able to track and trace not only a transaction and all of its authorizations and so on, but its actual settlement would be a radical improvement over even a blockchain baseline. So I do think it's important to recognize that moving to a stable coin and doing nothing else in the US health economy can create some improvements and some material improvements. But the real macroscopic value proposition is when a broader Web3, Web2 integration framework gets implemented. Sorry, go ahead, Chris.
I was gonna say, if you'll permit me an analogy. So about 7,000 years ago, people realized that they can ride horses, and we still use the same terminology today whenever we buy a car with horsepower. About 7,000 years ago, people invented money, and we still use the same terminology when we talk about monetary policy. The difference between the car and the monetary policy that makes the car more efficient is we don't stick horses in our cars. We don't use 5,000-year-old technology to try to keep a modern device working. And that's what we're doing. We're basically taking what we've been doing for 5,000 years in monetary policy and not changing it at all and trying to hope that these modern systems that are so like, I mean, we're using nanotubules to attack cancer now in medicine, and we're paying for it with little pieces of paper that people have been using for thousands of years. Like, it's not an effective way to do it because just using COVID as an example, what's the most likely thing you're going to get COVID off of? A dollar bill, because everybody's just passing this money back and forth, and a lot of stores went to using credit cards, which I mean that was so much more effective because you have to touch little credit card pans. But um, moving with digital and touch-free technology, especially in the medical field, seems like a no-brainer. And you'd think that that would be what Congress is good at because you could actually do everything touch-free. You could have it all with your device and be able to do these transfers. And then it opens you up to, as you said, the wealth of blockchain abilities. And you are right. Blockchain is probably the second most diverse word in the English language on the other side of the one George Carlin tried to explain to us. And the dollar bill, and not just the dollar bill, fiat currency in general, is fundamental as a wealth management tool. But if we over rely on it, it's like saying sugar is fundamental for a person to live, but if all you eat is sugar, it's not going to keep you alive. And our system is getting to the point that we need a diversity of ideas, we need a diversity of implementation, and we need the individual labs, not just the ones Romney was talking about at the state levels putting things out, but at the individual level where there are high school kids using AI to create new business models that are curing cancer or curing specific cancers. I mean, cancer is a huge topic, but if we put something like the Genius Act into effect, which limits the ability for hospitals to innovate, eliminates peripheral companies' ability to innovate, we're basically putting retarders on everything in the progress that we're doing right now. Whereas if the Genius Act goes back to its fundamental goal of consumer protection, let the industry lead on that. I can tell you at least probably 500 people, not including myself, that would go in front of Congress and say, I have an idea. I mean, we could send Eugene, and Eugene would have at least 5 ideas on how to make these better, and they would all be better than the Genius Act. Because if you guys don't know, Eugene, I do believe he's one of the brightest guys in the field. And if we bring this together and we bring industry leaders like the Government Blockchain Association that has Gerard and Kathy have done such a great job bringing leaders in the field together and let them speak in front of Congress instead of having Sam Bankman-Fried speak in front of Congress, it would be so much better. So any of you Congress people that are watching this, call Heather and get her in front of Congress because she knows what she's talking about.
Or
And
get Dr.
she won't make
Smithmeyer. Thank you, by the
Yeah.
way.
Well, I'll make fun of them. Yeah, I'll make fun of them. You won't. You're much more polite than I am. But no, I work with a lot of Congress people and I do this all the time and I relay them to experts in the field in the specific areas. And I do truly believe that if we get people like you, people that are in the field to come and say, well, we can protect the customers. And there are Jim Schwan from CryptoBit and Rogue Trace. They are really good at hunting down scammers. And I know that's a little bit off of the topic now, but if we bring people like that from the field in that know the field so intimately that they can find the address of somebody that scammed some older woman that's like a senior citizen that was just looking to put money away for her grandkids' college fund, and we give them the resources of FINRA or FinCEN, we can do so much more protecting the people of the United States and the world from scammers than we can if some people in Washington are doing just what their sponsors and their lobbyists tell them to do. Because it is the people on the ground that built this world. This digital world was built by Generation X, and Generation X is being excluded from the conversation. I mean, we were there in 1981 when the first computer went on the World Wide Web. And we were there when Satoshi dropped his white paper, and now we're here. We're adults. We're in our 40s and 50s right now, So we're not a bunch of young kids coming to the table saying, "Hey, this is what our cool idea is." It's a bunch of people that saying, "We built that. We can tell you how to make it work better, and we can tell you how to get these asshole scammers out of our field."
All right. Okay. No profanity on
That's
GBA
my rant for the day.
webinars. But no, you raise an excellent point about there are extremely high value contributions of every generation that is in the workforce right now. Like that's an
Yeah.
excellent point. There's a few additional topics I want to dig into before we run out of time, specific to healthcare. So we focused a lot on if stable coins are integrated into the US payments apparatus, healthcare payments apparatus broadly, we have far superior traceability at a transaction level that's cryptographically verifiable on demand, through a range of different audit mechanics. And that's a powerful, powerful capability. But that's really looking at it just as us playing defense to protect ourselves against bad actors. Extremely
Mhm.
critical thing to do, eliminating waste, fraud, and abuse. But here's the magical thing. In my opinion, it's magical. It's a once in a lifetime opportunity for massive near term value creation, because the exact same apparatus, the exact same frameworks, technical policy, operating models, etc., those go in to mitigate waste, fraud, and abuse. And at the same time, you have the opportunity to introduce real-time settlement and solve an enormous problem for the health system in the US, which is, they refer to it as revenue cycle management, which is such a problem in healthcare that they have
Mhm.
its own discipline, an entire segment of solutions and vendors that try to accelerate the revenue cycle, the time from when a provider actually delivers a health service from when they get paid for that health service from an insurance company. And the implication of being able to demonstrate cryptographically the validity and legitimacy of the identities of the actors, the correctness of the payment, means that anything flagged for waste, fraud, and abuse gets put into a QA workflow, but anything that is not flagged can be settled immediately. This is a miracle level of improved cash flow for many health systems in the US that are on the brink of bankruptcy. And for anyone who doesn't know, rural America has become, in the last, over a process that's been going on over the last especially 5 to 6 years, but 15 years, the rural health systems across America have been collapsing. They have been bankrupting. And the business model that kept them solvent for years has shifted sufficiently that that business model doesn't work anymore. And fixing revenue cycle is one important tactic that can reintroduce solvency elements into a broken system, a struggling system. So speaking about this to the positive, the ability to have programmable payments that go across multiple parties. Like that's also, these payments are not just bilateral. They have many different entities that contribute either data for verification, inputs into the transaction, deliver pieces and parts of an episode of acute care or a chronic disease management program. So I'd love to, turn this to a bit more of a hopeful note and get your thoughts on this miracle characteristic that implementing the system with the intent of waste, fraud, and abuse without creating additional separate programs, separate spend, separate initiatives, also has the other side of the coin of radically improving the speed of commerce and therefore access to care quality, solvency of entities on the brink across the US. Thoughts on that, Chris?
I do think it is a miracle, because it can eliminate a lot of the cost for what's going on, because a lot of these payments can be set up as smart contracts. With the medical field, I'm just getting a statistic real quick. Um, it allows us to, there's a lot of redundancy in systems. There's a lot of reporting and stuff that causes it. And a vast maturity of the United States healthcare costs come from, well, we have to have a reporter, we have to have a coder, we have to have a transfer person, we have to have a reviewer, we have to have all these steps that basically each person is checking what the person did before them to make sure there wasn't any human error.
And that is not,
And
and by
that,
the way, that is a failed process. That is not eliminating
yeah,
medical errors. It is not eliminating coding errors in billing,
yeah.
not at any material scale. Like just, we spend
Cool.
a lot to try to do better. And I'm not
Well,
saying
it would,
what we spend on does nothing, but it certainly hasn't solved root cause issues.
yeah. Well, it would be like if you went to, or I went to a cardiologist and they put something in my file and it came up as a gynecological file and I was at a cardiologist. There's no reason for that to be coming out of a cardiologist's office, regardless of the sex of the patient. There would be no reason for that code to be entered into the system. A smart contract can kick that out immediately
Yes.
and let them know that and say, hey, something was treated. It goes right back to the person that coded it, and the person that coded it can fix the mistake because most people will fix their own mistakes. They don't want to be found as being incompetent. Whereas if it goes up to the insurance company, then the insurance company calls back and argues with the doctor. The doctor's office digs its heels in. Whereas this process can be very simple, whereas the doctor's assistant or the I forget what the initials for them are, the physician's assistant, a PA, they
Or
punch the yep, and then they punch the code in. It goes right into the system. Is this valid from the office? Is the charge proper? In which I have a huge problem with insurance companies telling doctors what they can charge because that would be like um, me telling Walmart what they can charge for my book or something like that. And what happens is it becomes a streamlined process where the doctor gets paid, the insurance company knows what the treatment is that the person's receiving, and the process can flow through with a higher level of faith. Because the whole concept of blockchain, whenever we are in a blockchain environment, so there we're taking it another step where we're using it as an adjective, um, is working in a trustless system where we don't have to trust the other person is not making any mistakes because the system does it for us. And the more we can build this trustless in, the more we can anonymize patient treatments so we can protect people's private information, but still provide an aggregate of the anonymized data to help society look at what's going on. So we can see that that doctor that's a cardiologist prescribed this much stuff. This is the procedure that they're ordering. Like if we know
I
that,
know, yeah. Can I interject there? And
go ahead.
I
Yeah, go ahead.
I just want to clarify an unsurprising characteristic of the US health economy is those that are issuing payments have implemented robust systems that for them flag claims as having issues of a variety of sorts that then automatically denies claims. And there are lovers and haters of that system, depending on what side of which table you're sitting on. But there are extremely robust and AI-driven systems that are effectively claims filters that automatically deny anything that gets flagged, kicked them back, and then provider orgs have the burden of sometimes recommendations of how to fix the claim will come back, but often, coders and billers need to conduct an investigation to figure out what was really wrong with that claim and what actually needs to happen. The things that actually need to happen, this is one of the reasons that healthcare is so different from finance as a general field. When we talk about the things that need to happen to get a claim paid, it could involve 8 different entities doing something with a patient across multiple health plans that are, supplemental, complementary, et cetera. So the core construct of the potential for secure multi-party computing without data centralization is the most radical fixer here, because what goes on right now is claims are bilateral. They don't take into consideration, if you have surgery, Chris, there's usually an anesthesia group, and there's a facility fee and a surgeon's fee. Usually those are three separate entities. Let's say you're a veteran and some of your conditions are covered by the Veterans Benefit Administration, and you have an employer plan that covers everything else. That's just an example of right there, that's 5 different entities that all have to reconcile around a single claim actually getting paid on time. And then there are data input requirements from all of those parties. And they all need reconciliation. And if you just imagine every single transaction can have those criteria, then you get into drug pricing, drug specific plans, different pharmacies, pharmacy benefit managers. It just gets unbelievably labyrinthine, Byzantine in its structure. We have this potential to introduce the same kinds of rigorous quality controls and coordination on the provider side that the payers have long since, in their own financial interests, naturally implemented on their side. And making that person-centered is remarkable. So for the audience, you talked about putting these things on smart contracts. I'm wanting to make the point that it is the multi-party nature of the vast majority of transactions that make that so valuable, because you can have an orchestration layer over and above whole ecosystems of different actors in health that have opposing interests and are on the opposite side of every negotiating table. So a couple quick things. One remark, and then I'm gonna ask a final question to bring this home before we are out of time. You have a remarkable background in conflict resolution. What I can tell you as a healthcare professional is that every single solitary transaction, almost every transaction that goes on in 18% of the US GDP, is a negotiation up by actors with opposing interests, and that only fractionally align with the interests of the patient. That's what this economy is. Can you give me a first closing remark on the implications of multi-party computing with a stablecoin payment system in that kind of apparatus? Imagine the conflict that could be prevented or mitigated. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, I completely agree with that. If you eliminate parties, that always makes it better. And you listed out some essential parties. The facilities person, the anesthesiologist, the surgeon, the vets, the private party insurance. The underlying parties that you think about is that there's a negotiator for each one of those teams. And in a lot of cases, negotiators get paid bonuses on how that they do. So their interest is not necessarily lined up with the company. Their interest is lined up with them making money. And the bonus system for negotiators, and I get yelled at all the time whenever I do like actual courses on negotiation, teaching high power negotiators, is it's unethical to have that system as a payment. Because if your job is to fight and fight and fight and fight to get the rate reduced so you get more money, you're not actually representing the company, you're representing your pocketbook. And whenever you have 5 people that have 5 different goals arguing in 5 different ways, the person that suffers is the patient.
That's
And
right.
then that causes the hospital to suffer because they can't get paid. And when they can't get paid, that means that the community suffers. And as you said, putting it under a smart contract where it just gets remedied if like 99% of cases are standard, 1% of cases are not standard. We can let these people fight, and I will refrain from the profanity. You guys are a little bit more cleaner than we are in the cryptocurrency group. And you remove that error and you can let them fight with each other on that 1%. Let them fight with each other on that 1%, because that 99% is what's going to pay for your hospital to stay open. That's what's going to pay for your local doctor to stay open.
Yeah.
And when you have a local person that can take care of you, your life's going to be that much better because to them you're Heather Lee Flannery. You're not number 571834123. Like you are a person, you're not a number to them. But to that insurance company and to a physician in another state, you're just the anonymized number that they put on your file. So working with your doctor that cares who you are as a person is more important than doing that. And the smart contract allows us to make sure we keep those people in business.
Absolutely. Thank you, Chris. So two last quick points before we sign off. The first one I want to make is that when we come up in altitude from a US centric health economy, health policy, health equity set of issues, and we look at global health and the funding for global health across low and middle income countries, that comprises 70% of all international development and foreign aid from all developed economies seeking to support low and middle income countries. So the global economy in healthcare is absolutely enormous, and the sovereign nations and large donors move enormous amounts of money around, seeking to deploy it to the highest impact and move around waste, fraud, abuse, corruption, warlords blocking the road and taking medications with machine guns, everything that you can imagine. So I want to, this has been a very US centric discussion today, but these principles applied globally can have a vast and sweeping impact on the amount of resources actually getting to where they need to get to all around the world, and being able to prove what impact is being created and what resources are being actually delivered on the ground where they're needed. And I'm going to offer you the last word, Chris, on the Government Blockchain Association, a really significant contribution that those of us that are leaders in the organization believe strongly in is the blockchain maturity model. You've made significant contributions to that model, especially particular supplements. As we look at potentially running something as massive as 18% of the US GDP on blockchain infrastructures using stablecoins, can you close us out by describing why the blockchain maturity model is important and how public sector actors should think about the very hard choices to be made if they agree in principle they want to do this? Actually implementing it and operationalizing it involves constellations of decisions to be made. I'll give you the last word on the blockchain maturity model as decision support and as an important part of an adoption, of a realistic adoption pattern. Over.
I I do believe that that's the only way that we can do it because whenever we look at the other certifications in crypto, you've got your security audit, which if you for those of you that are involved in cryptocurrency, if you have somebody that doesn't have a security audit, they're not a legitimate crypto because you have to be cryptologically secure. I mean, so you have to have your security audit. Then you have your code audit to make sure code works right. Then some people go and get the ISO 20222, which is the banks that you can work with a bank, which really doesn't apply in this field, but it's another certification. And that's pretty much it. The rest of it's you take it on faith that the code does what it's supposed to do, unless you go the whole way to formal verification. Before that, though, there is the BMM model, which is basically, and since we're in a medical thing, I use Gerard's statement that it's basically a colonoscopy for your company to go and see what's working inside the company. And Gerard came up with that, not me, so it's okay. And it's going through each of the major details of your company and your blockchain solution to make sure that it works. And before we put healthcare decisions, which by and large are the most important decisions in a person's life, on the blockchain, we need to make sure that the blockchain is ready to protect that information and provide the proper service because all it takes is one mistake. All it takes is one person getting the wrong drug, getting the wrong organ removed, or getting just the wrong treatment in general. And we lose a person, and that person takes away from the human tapestry, and it takes away from who we are as a species. and who the future is. Because one of my favorite things, I was watching an apologist one time argue with an atheist about, well, if God was real, why don't we have a cure for cancer? And he says, well, humans have killed millions of people in the last years. How do we know that that's not the person that cured cancer? It was somebody that was killed in a war or killed by a mistake or killed in a bus accident. It's We've got to eliminate as much of these mistakes that are killing our fellow human beings as possible. And as we saw last weekend with the war that happened very quickly and hopefully is back in ceasefire status very soon. If there's one thing that human beings are good at, it is screwing up and killing each other. And in the medical field, that's no different, where mistakes kill people. And the more we can eliminate that, the more we can allow nurses to do their trade and actually take care of people rather than being doing paperwork, the more we can allow doctors to treat patients and not treat their malpractice insurance, the better our healthcare system is going to be. Because I have yet to meet a doctor or a nurse that's not a person that gave up their entire life to do what they do, which is not a glamorous job by any means anymore. It used to be doctors were rich. Doctors aren't rich anymore. We can make this a better world where we can take care of people. And innovation is one of the big things that GBA is famous for, and I hope you'll join us at the upcoming GBA events. We have one coming up in September. I think there's one in October, and then GBA is going to be one of our keynote sponsors for the Federation Conference next March. So if you want any information on any of those, please reach out to me or Heather, and we can help you out with that. And you can become part of this conversation because, as I said, the human tapestry is so important, and you're an important strand, every single one of you. So take the time, get involved, let your Congress people know that we want innovation, let your Congress people know that we want consumer protection, and let them know that we want to have a medical center that we can give to kids and their kids and the kids behind them so that human race can continue to innovate and make this world a better place.
Thank you, Chris. We did get a really great question in from the audience, and I just want to quickly address it. Earlier in our conversation, you talked about how important it would be for payers to be able to be issuers of their own stable. And I
Mhm.
think everyone in the industry recognizes that tight integration with business and accounting and everything inside a large org is one really important vector for value creation here. You commented on that earlier in the conversation, but could you give us a 30-second summary of why that is so critical and how the Genius Act might be preventative of that occurring? And you did speak to it earlier, but just
Yes.
you summarize that in reaction to the great point that was raised by Michael Colson. Thank you,
Yeah.
Michael.
When you have a something get into your eye, you don't generally go to your general practitioner, you go to a specialist. And that's the person that helps you, and they're an expert in exactly what they're doing, so they can help you get whatever is in your eye out and save your vision. When we talk about monetary policy right now, what we do is everybody's a generalist because we have to work with fiat currencies that their basic function is just to replace bartering. As we introduce the ability to create stables into payment issuers and payment receivers in the medical field, we allow them to specialize and we allow them to put features in and expertise in that help them work with people to get the best results in the shortest amount of time. And it makes it a more refined process. So that's one of the reasons that I think it's so important for it to enter into the field is because we need to move in the human pendulum from generalization to specialization until we find that perfect balance. And we've been general on money for so long. Maybe it's time that we let specialists move in into individual fields and bring back that type of currency that works for a specific purpose as opposed to a general purpose. And I know I was about 45 seconds there, so I didn't quite make your 30-second limit.
No, that was great. Thank you. So with that, again, this has been the Government Blockchain Association's Healthcare and Life Sciences Working Group public webinar. It's been my great honor to have this incredibly in-depth conversation with Dr. Chris Smithmeyer. Chris, thank you for being here.
No worries.
Please visit gbaglobal.com to .org in order to join working groups, join the GBA. Please recall membership in the GBA is at no cost for all public servants, all public sector employees. And thank you all for being here, and we will see you next month. Thanks.
Bye, everybody.